They called humanity Mayflies with ambition. The phrase was spoken with a gentle, almost affectionate contempt, an indulgent smile from beings who lived for millennia and carried the memories of empires across generations. When humanity was first admitted to the Starborne Empire, it wasn't out of need or admiration. It was curiosity, the way one might collect an odd insect with shimmering wings and wonder what it might do if left in a garden of giants. Mira Sael had heard the phrase often. As a diplomat from Earth, she had spent the last 15 years in the spire of Hfy, the ceremonial capital of the Starborne Empire, a city carved into a hollowed moon orbiting a gas giant. Hfy was not built for humans. Its halls shimmered with quantum phase walls, doors that opened only to telepathic keys, and air subtly infused with empathic residue from species who spoke through shared feelings rather than words. But Mira endured. She wore her translation lenses like jewelry, carried a portable resonance field to keep her body temperature stable, and memorized diplomatic etiquette the way an actor learned her lines. And above all, she smiled. That human smile, a flicker of expression so brief it baffled the ancients, was her weapon, her shield, and her defiance. On the day the Ashen Light arrived, she was watching a debate in the Grand Chamber. It was a slow, sprawling affair. The Thalan representative, a serpentine being with 7 minds, had spent 6 hours proposing a new classification system for temporal trade routes. Mira sat in her translucent dome, a human-only environment bubble, and resisted the urge to bang her head against the wall. Then it happened. Not an explosion, not a sound, but a silence, a thick, heavy silence that fell across the chamber like a shroud. The Thalan paused mid-sentence. The Hfy delegates, always so radiant with telepathic song, dimmed visibly. One by one, the Starborn stilled. Mira felt it too, but not as they did. To the ancients, it was a sudden dulling of all drives, a psychic eclipse that drained purpose and color from thought. To Mira, it was something she only noticed in them. She blinked, checked her translators, and looked around. "Excuse me," she said aloud, though her words were likely drowned in the oppressive quiet. "But something's wrong, isn't it?" None answered. Some sat with heads bowed. Others stared blankly, their eyelids fluttering like they were dreaming. She stepped out her dome. The psychic residue of the chamber hit her like warm fog, but she pushed through, weaving among the silent titans. It was then that she noticed Counselor Valakar, a Zentari sage who had once lectured her on the futility of short-term vision. The Zentari's 4 eyes were closed, his breathing slow, but his entire posture radiated despair. Not sadness, not fear, just the absence of will. She waved a hand in front of his face. "Valakar." "Nothing." She turned, and the chamber rippled slightly. Thoughtless, not thoughtless like a void, but like a song whose final note had been held too long. That's when her assistant, Tom, pinged her from Earth's consulate. His voice cut through the eerie quiet like a lifeline. "Mira, something's happening. The local minds are going blank, like they've forgotten how to care. It's everywhere." She looked up at the skylight, where the massive red sun of Hfy's system shimmered. It pulsed unnaturally, too rhythmic, too deliberate. "Record everything," she said, "and give me a comms link to Earth. We might be the only ones not affected." The first reports came within hours. Entire cities on the Elder Worlds had simply stopped functioning, not because of war or attack, but because the people no longer wanted to maintain them. Food systems failed as caretakers forgot to check them. Starships sat idle in hangars while their pilots stared into mirrors. Artisans abandoned projects mid-stroke. On the world of Halvok, the entire planetary council simply walked away during a session and never returned. They called it the Ashen Light, a poetic name for a solar plague. It wasn't a virus. It wasn't magic. It was apathy on a cosmic scale, a lethargy that resonated in the biopsychic fields of the Starborn, spreading through their interconnected awareness like a rot in the roots of a vast tree. But humans remained untouched. Scientists scrambled for reasons. Was it lack of telepathy? Absence of long-form memory and coding? Some flaw in the human brain that made them less susceptible to psychic resonance? But answers didn't come fast enough. So Mira acted. She gathered the few human delegates in Hfy, diplomats, traders, students, and convened a session inside her dome. She broadcast a message across the Empire's network, translated into every known psychic code. "We see you falling asleep. Let's help you wake." Within days, small human teams were dispatched to the most affected worlds, not as rescuers or invaders, but as presents. Teachers resumed classes in abandoned schools. Artists painted murals in crumbling cities. Chefs cooked in empty plazas. Children played in silence, and slowly, ever so slowly, Starborne eyes began to turn. It wasn't a cure. Not yet. But it was something. Mira watched it unfold with a mix of fear and awe. "They need us," she whispered to herself one night, alone in her dome. Not because humanity was better, not stronger, not wiser, but because they moved, because the clock ticked for them, because they did not have the luxury of waiting for the centuries to pass. There were no sirens when the Ashen Light swept across the Hfy homeworld. No red alerts, no planetary shields. Just silence, profound and total. From orbit, the world shimmered with beauty. Cities of translucent coral spires glittered in the daylight. Rivers of living crystal flowed through gardens that remembered their architects' dreams. But from the surface, the silence was thick enough to taste. The Hfy, once the most radiant of the elder races, had gone dim. Their telepathic voices, once a chorus that stretched across star systems, had thinned to whispers, then fallen to nothing. It was here that Jonas Reed, a 38-year-old teacher from New Vancouver, first set foot on alien soil. His ship, a short-range diplomatic shuttle, descended into the heart of a city called Salmera. The landing platform was abandoned. Automated systems had engaged docking protocols, but there was no welcoming party, not even a curious onlooker. Jonas stepped out with a single companion, a 7-year-old Starborne child named Kale, who had been orphaned during the first wave of the plague. The boy was let Hfy by heritage, but he had spent the last year in the human enclave on Hfy. He had learned to laugh, to speak aloud, to draw badly and run awkwardly. And unlike the adults of his kind, Kale still felt. "This is where I was born," Kale said softly, stepping onto the platform. "But it smells old." Jonas didn't correct him. Everything about the place did feel ancient, stagnant, like a mausoleum that didn't know it was one. They walked into the nearest plaza, an amphitheater made of iridescent stone that pulsed with bioluminescent veins. Every seat was empty. The air trembled with faint psychic echoes, like a symphony that had played for eons and had now simply stopped. Jonas activated his translator drone. It pinged the area with basic inquiries. "Anyone home? Is assistance needed? We bring aid. We bring presents." Nothing. Until a flicker. A figure emerged from the far shadows of the amphitheater. Tall, elegant, but hunched. Her skin was a shade of blue, so pale it seemed gray, and her eyes held the glazed look of someone lost in a dream with no end. Jonas approached slowly. "Hello, my name is Jonas. This is Kale." The woman did not speak, but her mouth moved. Kale stepped forward, took her hand, and something passed between them. Not words, not thoughts, just a pulse of warmth. Like a spark, the woman blinked. Once, twice, and then she wept. In the following days, Jonas transformed the amphitheater into a school. He hung human-made paintings across the outer arches. He played music, actual music, with melody and rhythm and imperfections, through an old Earth-made speaker. He wrote lessons on chalkboards and invited children, Hfy and otherwise, to sit and learn. It was absurd, many said. Dangerous, others whispered. The Hfy were too fragile, too psychic, too evolved to handle humanity's blunt, clumsy methods. But the children came, and then a few adults. And when Jonas read from a book, an Earth classic called The Little Prince, one of the elder Hfy broke down in the middle of a passage. "You remember," the man said, almost disbelieving. "You remember what it means to wonder." Jonas just smiled. Back in Hfy, Mira Sael watched the reports come in with increasing awe. It wasn't just Jonas. On Davarak, a human sculptor had begun shaping monuments to motion, kinetic sculptures that spun and danced in the wind. Local inhabitants gathered to watch, confused but entranced. On Varine, a team of human engineers had restored an entire orbital station, working around the clock in shifts. The locals had called it pointless at first. Now, many volunteered to assist, not out of duty, but because they'd remembered the thrill of progress. Mira compiled the data and prepared for the inevitable confrontation. The High Tribunal of the Starborne Empire was convened for the first time in years. Only half its seats were filled. Many counselors were lost to the Ashen Light's apathy or simply did not care enough to attend. Mira stood in the center chamber, alone beneath the halo of the empathic lens, a construct that recorded not only speech, but the emotion behind it. She inhaled deeply. "We were not invited to save you," she began, "and we are not here to claim dominion. We came to this empire as guests. You called us Mayflies with ambition. Perhaps you were right." A low murmur from the gallery. "But what you saw as a flaw is perhaps our only gift. We do not wait centuries to act. We do not need perfect harmony or consensus. We build because we do not have time to waste. We act because we do not assume there will be another chance." The Lethari delegates stirred slightly. Mira pushed on. "You wonder why we are immune to the plague. I cannot answer biologically, but I believe it is because we burn. Because our lives are brief, and that makes us urgent. We do not have time to forget how to care." A flicker of motion at the edge of her vision. Thalan Vel, the Zentari archivist, recording everything. His 6 eyes did not blink. "We ask for only one thing," Mira said, her voice quiet now. "Let us try. Let us help. Not as children or curiosities. As fellow citizens of this empire. Not because we deserve it, but because we refuse to sleep." The chamber held its breath. Then the Theroan delegate, ancient beyond measure, spoke with a voice like a mountain sliding into the sea. "Prove it. Change something that matters." And so humanity did. They rebuilt a city on Halvik in 32 days. Where once had stood glass towers and obsidian roads, now rose buildings made of steel, moss, and concrete. They weren't beautiful, not by Starborne standards, but they were alive, filled with human families, laughter, energy. They reopened a Starborne university and staffed it with both human and alien instructors. The first lecture was on entropy. The second was on hope. They broadcast daily messages across the empire. Music, stories, short plays, jokes, confessions. People listened. Some scoffed. Some cried. But they listened, because the spark was spreading. There was no master plan, no doctrine, no imperial decree. Just a ripple, one act of life after another, spreading from planet to planet like sparks on a dry wind. The Starborne Empire, vast and ancient, had long depended on its sense of timelessness. Worlds turned slowly, and decisions took years to form. Evolution was measured in millennia. But now, in the growing shadow of the Ashen Light, that slowness became a poison. And the only antidote, unexpected, illogical, and wholly human, was urgency. It started with a painter. Her name was Isla Vance, and she came from the slums of the Martian Ring cities. She'd been born into scarcity, raised in chaos, and taught herself to draw with chalk on the sides of collapsed freighters. When the Ashen Light reached the crystalline cities of Valis, she volunteered as part of a cultural envoy. They gave her a respirator, a canvas, and told her not to expect much. She painted anyway. The walls of Valis were polished, reflective, and sterile, like glass too clean to hold memory. So Isla painted fire on them. Great spirals of color, anger, birth, defiance, and joy. At first, no one came. The locals passed silently, their thoughts dulled by the plague. But then a child stopped. Then a second. One elder paused long enough to see something in her strokes, a shape that stirred a forgotten feeling. On the 4th day, Isla painted until she collapsed from exhaustion. By the end of the week, the walls of the city burned with color. Not real flame, but the kind that lived in memory. On the 8th day, 2 locals picked up brushes. Across the empire, similar stories unfolded. On Karanos, a world of silent archives, a human named Raj Patel, once a subway engineer from New Delhi, took it upon himself to fix the city's dormant transit systems. He had no permission, no blueprints, just grit and intuition. He restored one line, then two. When questioned by a stunned local archivist, he simply said, "I didn't want to wait." The archivist followed him back to the next tunnel, not to stop him, but to help. In the cold orbitals of Iridian Reach, human medics set up makeshift clinics in zero-G. Starborne beings drifted through like ghosts, long having ceased to care for their health. One human nurse, Layla Bryant, would float through the darkened halls singing lullabies, earth songs in languages the patients couldn't understand, but felt deep in their chests. She was caught once by a Voker warden. "You dare impose your noise on sacred stillness?" he growled. She didn't flinch. "Yes," she said, "because quiet is killing you." He didn't report her. He brought her tea the next day. And on the world of Hfy, a place once shrouded in despair, the rebuilding was almost mythic. The human settlement at the edge of the city, now nicknamed New Light, had become a hub of activity. Children ran in the streets, street vendors served food from converted atmospheric processors, and laughter echoed in alleys where silence had reigned for decades. The Starborne watched, first in confusion, then in wonder. How could they be so alive? They called them reckless, wasteful, emotional, but they came anyway. They sat in classes taught by human historians. They danced to off-tempo music played on salvaged instruments. They painted murals beside Isla Vance, sang beside Layla Bryant, and laid transit lines with Raj Patel. 1,000 human names, spoken for the first time in Starborne dialects. 1,000 moments, shared instead of stored. And still the Ashen Light loomed, undeterred, perhaps uncomprehending, but now it had competition. Now it had resistance. Thalan Vel, the Zentari archivist, had once believed history was a passive act, a duty to record, not to interfere. But something had changed. He followed Mira Sael on a diplomatic mission to one of the oldest Starborne worlds, Sereth Prime. There, they found libraries of living memory still pulsing, but unattended. Monuments built to outlast time, now cracking from neglect. "It's like they built forever, then forgot why," Mira said, standing at the foot of a 10-kilometer obelisk. "You know what the problem with immortality is? No deadlines." Thalan, who had recorded 8,000 years of his people's history, was silent. Until he spoke. "I would like to build something," he said. "Not to last, just to exist. For now, not all welcome the change." A faction of elder species, led by the austere Valari ascendancy, declared humanity a destabilizing force. They accused Earth of spreading temporal discord, of infecting the Starborne with chaotic sentiment. They were right. The Valari launched a precision strike on the rebuilt Hfy settlement, claiming it as quarantine enforcement. A sterile energy bomb, non-lethal but deeply symbolic, wiped out half the infrastructure in seconds. Isla Vance's mural wall was obliterated. Dozens were injured. 3 humans died. Mira stood before the Empire again, trembling with grief and fury. "You fear us," she said, "because we change things too fast, because we make noise in your quiet. But that noise is life. That urgency is hope." The lawn stood beside her. "She is right," he said. "You once called them Mayflies. But what is a Mayfly? A life so brief it must matter now. That spark is not a danger. It is a reminder. The Empire did not punish the Valari, but neither did it stop what followed. Because after the attack, humans returned to Hfy. In force. They rebuilt the mural wall, bigger. They held a public concert in the ruins. They left the damage visible, integrated into the art. The mural's new centerpiece? A human hand reaching forward, not in violence, in invitation. Painted beside it, a Valari hand reaching back. The artist? A young Valari. The Zentari Observatory on Luma's crown had not been staffed in a century. It orbited a small, golden star, suspended between timeless records of solar flares and a vast hall of living archives. The last caretaker had left when the Ashen Light began whispering through the starlight. Since then, the station had remained dormant, immaculate, lifeless, preserved, until the humans came. A group of engineers and historians, artists and hackers, arrived in a rusting freighter they dubbed the Daymaker. They weren't sanctioned. They weren't invited. But they came with purpose. They scrubbed dust from panels, repaired memory crystal interfaces, uploaded music into silent chambers. When the Zentari Council was notified of the trespass, their reply was slow and dismissive. If they wish to chase entropy, one counselor muttered, let them. The station is no longer relevant. But relevance, it turned out, was no longer something decided by council. Mira Sael stood on a platform in the central ring of Luma's crown, watching as holograms bloomed back into life. Entire centuries of celestial memory returning like color to a faded photograph. Thalan Vel stood beside her, his body unusually tense for a Zentari. His limbs, which often flowed with a serene grace, now twitched with something close to impatience. I used to believe the future was something we awaited, Thalan said quietly. A river to be observed. But now, I find I want to build the riverbed. Mira smiled. Welcome to the present. She handed him a simple object, a time capsule, handmade by a child from Halvik. It contained a stone, a drawing, and a recording of laughter. Thalan placed it into the archive. We've begun adding ephemeral entries, he said. Things that won't last. On purpose. The very notion would have horrified archivists a generation ago. But those archivists were asleep now, or too bound by the Ashen Light to care. And in their absence, the humans moved. On Earth, time had always been a challenge. It worked against them, aging their bodies, wearing down their systems, pressing them ever forward. But now, that same pressure made them powerful. They evolved. Faster. Human universities developed new hybrid sciences, fusing Starborne memory thread with human intuition, combining slow learning systems with rapid iteration. Human artists trained in alien color theory. Engineers adopted Starborne construction techniques, modifying them with a little chaos, a little risk, a little beauty. On Varine, the first shared Spark school opened, founded jointly by humans and Lethari. It taught both ancient memory weaving and human improvisation. It taught history not just to remember it, but to challenge it. In one class, a Zentari child sculpted a future monument that would dissolve within a decade. The final exam? Whether it made someone cry. The child passed. Yet not all progress was smooth. As humanity gained influence, resentment grew. The elder species had shaped the empire for millennia. Now, in a mere generation, humanity had become its emotional backbone, its cultural agitators, its torchbearers. The Valari ascendancy withdrew from open participation. Several core worlds refused human immigration. Anti-Mayfly sentiment, once a joke, hardened into ideology. They called it the slow doctrine, a belief that pace itself was the disease, that the Ashen Light was not a plague but a natural correction, that the humans were the infection. In the Empire's governing core, a gridlocked council argued for weeks over whether to halt human-led projects. Mira Sael watched as a proposed human Starborne Council was shelved again, and then buried. We're lighting a fire in a house that still thinks it's a museum, she muttered. Thalan Vel approached her, a scroll of memory ribbon in hand. Then perhaps it's time to open the windows. Jonas Reed was dying. He'd returned to Ordis after 15 years of service, still a teacher, still humble, but now with failing lungs and tired eyes. The Empire offered him prolongation, memory extraction, psionic encapsulation. He refused. I was never meant to stay long, he told Mira, who visited his bedside. That's the whole point, isn't it? Mira wept. His funeral was held in the amphitheater he had once reopened with Kale. Thousands came. Lethari, Zentari, Valari, humans. Some brought offerings of memory. Others brought art. But most brought their presence. Kale, now grown, gave the eulogy. He taught us that the moment matters. Not because it lasts, but because it doesn't. When Jonas's ashes were scattered over the city, a new mural was unveiled. Not a portrait, not a symbol, Just a blank wall and a sign beside it that read, "Paint something today, because you can." And so the tide turned, not in a roar, but in 1,000 quiet revolutions. More Starborn joined human-led efforts, not as followers, but as partners. The Valari resistance softened as younger generations began to question the doctrine of stillness. And in council chambers once locked by protocol, debates were restarted with urgency. A hybrid team of humans and Zentari introduced a new motion, the Moment Mandate, a policy of active action requiring any governing body to make a decision within a defined time frame. It passed by a single vote, and the galaxy shifted. Mira Sael, older now, stood atop the Ortiz spire, watching ships leap into warp, faster than light, faster than hesitation. Beside her, Thalan held a crystal etched with the words of Jonas Reed. "He burned bright," he said. Mira nodded. "And now we all remember how." The Starborne Empire was not rebuilt in a single act. There was no coronation, no sudden cure, no chorus of revival. Instead, the change came slowly, insistently, like water rising in a cracked basin. Invisible at first, undeniable in time. 1,000 tiny moments, 1,000 mortal sparks. It began with a voice. Each morning, across the vastness of the Empire's still functional communication grid, a new broadcast aired. It was called the Now Signal. A simple, human-made transmission of stories, announcements, songs, questions, and laughter. No one ordered it. No one asked for it. But someone, somewhere listened, and then another, and another. On the world of Ethyrus, where entire cities have been silent for decades, a gathering of Starborn citizens stood in a half-ruined plaza. They were there to see something never before attempted, a spontaneous performance. A group of humans and Valari youth had choreographed a hybrid dance, performed barefoot on the stone. The performance lasted 12 minutes. The applause lasted much longer. An elder Zentari wept openly. "I had forgotten what surprise felt like," he whispered. In the skies above Halvik, the Empire's first human-designed starcruiser launched under a new flag. Not Earth's, not Halvik's, not the Council's. It bore a symbol of two outstretched hands, one five-fingered, one alien. Its name was Legacy of the Moment. Aboard were humans, Zentari, Lethari, Valari, and more. Scientists, poets, healers, engineers, all bound by one shared creed. We do not wait. Mira Sael was offered the title of Chancellor. She declined. Instead, she helped found the Assembly of Renewal, a trans-species coalition made of citizens, not dynasties. No seat on the Assembly was held for longer than 5 years. Every policy carried an expiration clause. Every decision had to be lived with now, not promised away to the future. Mira's only request? That every new Assembly session begin by reading the eulogy Jonas Reed had once inspired. The moment matters, not because it lasts, but because it doesn't. Some worlds still resisted. There were still doctrines of stillness, enclaves of silence. The Ashen Light had not vanished completely. It lingered in pockets, in minds too far gone to be reached. But where the light dulled, sparks now followed. Not soldiers, not conquerors, just people. With guitars, with stories, with tools and jokes, and the need to make something. Even the Valari, once staunch in their resistance, began to shift. It was a Valari artist, young, defiant, bold, who hosted the first galactic artquake, a live, system-wide performance festival that lasted 3 days and crashed 4 major data relays. She called it a necessary overload. Thalan Vel retired from archiving. His last entry wasn't a record. It was a letter to whomever remembers. If you are reading this, it means we have not fallen back asleep. Let the humans remind you again if we do. Let the moment be enough. He ended the message with a joke, an old, untranslatable Zentari pun that no one had used in 6,000 years. But Mira laughed when she read it. And Earth? Earth was never the center. It never tried to be, but it remained the matchbox in the pocket of the galaxy. A place to learn urgency, to feel music at midnight, to fear death and live because of it. Starborn children began attending Earth schools. Some aged out of them before the curriculum finished, thanks to their slower biology. But they kept coming, because Earth taught them the one thing their ancestors had forgotten. That time isn't a burden. It's a blessing. A century later, no one spoke of the Ashen Light in fear. They spoke of it like a nightmare now past, a long sleep from which they'd awakened. The Empire did not return to what it had been. It became something else, faster, stranger, alive, and at the heart of it all, humans. The Mayflies with ambition. The torchbearers of now.